All right, we're going to be looking at Judges chapters 19 and 20 tonight. We've got 2 chapters to cover, so I hope everybody has read these chapters, or at least scanned them, and knows a little bit about the material that we're going to be looking at, because obviously we're not going to have time to read much, if any, of these chapters themselves. One more lesson after this one in the book of Judges. We'll finish that up, Lord willing, next week. But this week, we're going to be looking here at chapters 19 and 20. And question number 1 on your handout, kind of a think about it, or a little bit about what we're going to be studying about tonight. But the question is, what specific actions do you associate with hospitality? If you think that somebody is a hospitable person, what are some things that you would imagine they would do, or think that they would do? Okay, so a hospitable person would open up their home to you. Okay, what else? Any other qualities, characteristics? Yeah, that's what I thought of. Yeah, usually if they're going to at least offer you something to eat, right? But usually try to feed you, try to provide for you, give you a meal. Anything else? Yeah, they're going to take some time out, spend some time with you, keep you company if you're lonely or by yourself, or, provide conversation. What else? Anything else? Yes, sir.
We went to Chicago last week or 2 weeks ago, and I explained to those ladies that didn't take care of me and stuff, and I said, well, Gail told them. She said they had a benefit for Mark, and that's how we can afford to come up here. So the hospitality that I got from the benefit was crazy. I mean, astronomical, huge. But anyway, that lady up there, she said, what's a benefit? She had no idea. I'm not kidding you.
Yeah.
She didn't have a clue what a benefit was. So I don't know. I'm just saying that the hospitality from that part, on my part, was good, But as far as those ladies, she had never heard of that. She didn't know, and I said, you live in Chicago, don't you?
Maybe they have a different name for it up there. I don't know. But yeah, that would, the idea of an open hand, I think, would probably be a characteristic of a hospitable person. They're going to give you whatever you need or help you in any way that they can. All those are good qualities that are associated with hospitality. And of course, if you looked at the lesson tonight there in chapters 19 and 20, we're going to read about a group of people who weren't very hospitable. But certainly as Christians, that's something that we're supposed to practice, isn't it? Hospitality, open arms, open hands, open homes, open hearts, things like that. So in chapter 19, I don't really know. I've talked a little bit about these last few chapters being a glimpse, I think, I think they help us understand, just how bad things were during the time of the judges. We talked about family relationships. We talked about, the condition of the spiritual leaders. The last couple chapters that we looked at, I think it kind of emphasizes to us how bad idolatry was during that day and age. And these couple of chapters, to me, if I had to kind of, put them under an idea or a theme, I think it would be the practice of morality, or the lack of practice of morality. Because it's kind of a glimpse into the lives of people, just how far morally they had fallen, in a very, very short period of time. We're going to talk about tonight as we look at this. We're not looking very far into the period of the judges as we're reading about right here. And I imagine over the years, it says every time Israel went back, they got worse. And so it kind of gives us an indication, again, I think, just how bad things were at this particular time. But
you're not talking about this day and time?
This day and time, well, you can, if the shoe fits, wear it. That's what I always say. So, yeah. I don't think it's getting any better this day and time either, do you? But there's a lot of good lessons that we can take from this. A lot of similarities, I think, between our time and theirs. But we read about a glimpse into the life of a man, a Levite, a certain Levite, the Bible describes him as there. And I'm not going to spend, I didn't even have a question here on the first 14 verses here in chapter 19. But I do want to just kind of point out a few things about morality from these particular verses. So what do you learn about this Levite, morally speaking, from those first 14 verses?
Well, he must have been a man with a little bit of means if he had a servant and concubine.
Okay.
So, in the concubine for a Levite, that was telling all the time.
Yeah, so basically we read about him having a concubine here, right? And what's a concubine? Does anybody remember?
Servant wife?
Pretty much. It wasn't your primary wife, but it was a wife, a woman that some of these people married. And usually, well, I wouldn't say that women had a lot of freedom back then anyway, but you treated her like a slave, but she was your wife. And so you're reading about a Levite here. Again, this is supposed to be the spiritual leaders during this day and time, practicing polygamy. Okay, so right here you're already, got a red flag going up for morality here. Now, how did she treat this Levite, her husband?
She didn't like something because she left.
Yeah, well, I think it says she's unfaithful, right? In verse 2, she played the harlot against him, right? So she cheats on him, and why does she run away to her father? Why didn't she stick around?
She probably figured he was going to kill him.
Yeah, that was the law, right? Adultery under the law of Moses was punishable by death. And so she runs off and stays with her father. So again, you're seeing a little glimpse into the moral condition of that day and that age. Well, how long before the Levite decides he wants her back? Let's pick up on that.
4 months, wasn't it?
Yeah, 4 months. What took him 4 months? That'd be my question, right? Do you think he really cared for this woman?
Might have taken that long to cool off.
Well, it could have been. Yeah.
Just saying, if he actually cared about her.
Yeah.
Saying
I think
it took him 4 months just to get to the idea that he wouldn't kill her when he found her.
well, that could be. But I think as you go through the couple chapters here, I don't think, pretty obvious, he didn't care for her a whole lot, did he? I mean, to him, she was his property, and he didn't want to lose any property. So I think that's where he saw value in her particularly. But anyway, 4 months later, he decides he wants her back, so he goes to her father's house. And what do they do for 3 days? Yeah, eat and drink. So basically, they're partying, for 3 days. Her father says, this is a joyous occasion. He's come back for it. And they're celebrating for 3 days. And at the end of 3 days, his father says, why don't you stay another day? This is so much fun. We're enjoying ourselves so much here. Let's have another, day of festivities. And so they do that. He tries to depart on the 4th day, the 4th night. He said, listen, it's getting late. Why don't you stay another day? Let's go into day 5. And so eventually, after 5 days, I guess the Levite decided, well, I've had enough celebration. And he decides that it's time to go home. But again, I mention all those things because I think what it does is it gives you a glimpse into the morality of that day and age. This is a Levite we're talking about here. Practicing polygamy. His wife openly cheats on him. He goes to his father-in-law to bring her back. They're partying for 5 days, So it kind of sets the tone for the rest, or the other couple, the rest of chapter 19 and then chapter 20 that we're going to look at. So anyway, he decides that they're going to set out for that night. Obviously, they cannot make it home before darkness falls. And so they're forced to find shelter for the night in one of the cities that they're traveling along, or the route that they're traveling along. Now, there's a particular city that he doesn't want to go into, right? What city was that?
Jerusalem.
Yeah, why did he not want to go there?
Being a Levite, he'd probably be looked down upon, would he? Going into Jerusalem?
Okay, yeah, possibly he could have. But what's significant about Jerusalem at this time?
It wasn't Jews, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Does anybody remember how it actually came into the possession of Israel, Jerusalem? You know the story behind it?
Wasn't that David promised the guy that did it
did it.
Yeah.
I don't know if he went through the water duct and climbed the wall or what they did.
Yeah, so it shows you, you know, we've been studying about Israel leaving all these different people in the land. Well, Jerusalem right now, it's not under even Jewish rule. You know, again, that doesn't happen until David's reign, where he actually conquers it, makes it his capital of Israel, or the city where he resides, or the king resides. So at this particular time, it was, you know, full of foreigners. Full of all these nations that God had told the Israelites to drive out. And he doesn't want to go there. Why not?
Because it's full of alien. It's full of people that are not Israelites.
Yeah, he's probably concerned. He says, listen, you know, this is rough times. I don't want to stay here in these foreigners' place. You know, we don't belong there, and, you know, something bad could come along and happen to us. So what does he decide is a better way? What's he looking for? Yeah, a city that belongs to Israel, right? Somebody where our brethren are there. You know, we'll be treated well and won't have to worry about things. At least that was his mindset, right? So he ends up finding Gibeah, turning aside and going to Gibeah. So question number 2 here, what happens when the Levite man goes into the city of Gibeah? Where does he go? Okay, to the city square, right? And why did he go to the city square? Okay, nobody would take him in, but why would you go to the city square?
Center of town, you don't have to worry about it.
Okay, the center of town. I think probably what he's hoping for is an invitation, don't you? It's kind of like you said, it's the center of town. It's going to be obviously where most of the people are and most of the action is. And so in that day and age, you have to understand, you know, there weren't inns and motels and hotels like we have today on every corner. So if a person was traveling, they had to kind of rely upon hospitality, didn't they? They had to rely upon somebody opening their home and giving them a place to sleep, or, you know, shelter, some place to stay at least for however long they planned on staying. So that's what he was hoping to do. Was if somebody did choose to take him in, would it have cost them?
Well, he said, I have the supplies myself. So they could have volunteered it, but he could have provided his own supplies, right?
Yeah, so basically, you know, when he runs into this old man, they have this conversation. He says, listen, I can pay my own way. You know, you don't have to give us any food. You don't even have to give our animals anything. We got enough food for them. I think he's really just looking for shelter, you know. So the only thing that it wouldn't have been overburdensome to somebody to have invited him and taken him in. But of course, nobody wanted to do that, right? And so he runs into an old man here this is not his permanent home. He's down here working. But he invites them in, and, you know, he talks to them a little bit, asks them what their plans were. They said, well, we're just going to stay here on the square for the night. And he advised against that, right? Why does he advise against that? Question, what are we on here? 3.
I'd say dangerous.
Yeah, it doesn't really say why he advised against it, right? But he just said, not going to happen. You know, I'm not going to leave you here. You're not going to stay here. You guys are going to come home with me, and I'll provide you for a place to stay. And so he does. He opens up his home. He opens up his heart. You know, and you look in verse 22 there of chapter 19. They're enjoying themselves. You know, they're having a good time. In other words, he didn't just invite them over and stick them outside the stable and, you know, withdraw from them, right? He's actually involved with them and doing things, and, you know, they're fellowshipping with one another. They have common area. They're from common area, so they probably had some things that they could talk about. But they're having an enjoyable time. And as they're doing that, what happens? What's question number 4 here? What do the wicked men of the city want when they surround the house? All right, he hears a knock on the door. He opens up the door, and the Bible says you know, all these wicked men are standing here outside. What'd they want?
It's like a redo of Lot
Yeah.
with the angels. Do you think like, that Gibeah was exceptionally bad? Because it's like this Levite had no clue this was coming. He was searching out a town of Israelites. He finds one. It's like he was blindsided. He had no clue this was coming. Do you think this was an exceptionally evil city? Or do you think that was rampant? Because it doesn't seem like he expected that where he was going, you know?
Yeah. No, I don't think personally, you know, just thinking about some of the things that, some of the information the Bible offers, that it would have been known for that. Because I think one of the things that, one of the reasons I say that is because when it comes down to settling the matter, that's the tribe of Benjamin, right? This is the area of Benjamin. Do they have any problems with it? You know, when Israel over here in chapter 20, they say, give us these guys. They said, boy, these are wicked guys. You know, we're ready. Here they are. They actually defend them, don't they? So to me, it kind of indicates, you know, this was kind of the norm of that day and age. You know, it didn't really, at least to Benjamin, it didn't really strike a chord where they said, we got to get rid of these guys and we got to do something. You know, it's almost like sometimes, well, Romans chapter 1, where Paul talks about the Gentiles. You know, they not only know what they do is wrong, but they have pleasure in everybody else doing it too. And so that's kind of the impression that I get from reading that passage. Yes, sir.
I got the impression that it's sort of like there are streets in St. Louis that you can go up and down all day long as the sun's up. When the sun goes down, do not shop, don't stop at gas, unless you live there and you know the local gang members, you know the people who, you know who to look out for, and you're just part of the group, you know, you're a resident. You just don't stop at gas. And I kind of get the feeling that may be the difference between this and Sodom and Gomorrah. Sodom and Gomorrah, it seems, the way I read it, it was that way all the time. We're not saying that it's only if it's at night it's okay. I get maybe the reason he's blindsided is because you don't really hear about what the, for lack of a better term, the gang's doing.
Yeah.
And maybe that's why they didn't turn him over, is because they maybe didn't realize some of the people they were asking for, they didn't realize were the ones who couldn't act. Does that make sense at all?
Yeah, and you know, a couple of things. Like we said, the Levite himself, I don't think that he had a clue.
He was blindsided.
Yeah, he was going to spend the night in the square. Now, the old guy, do you think he knew?
He knew.
Yeah.
Because he lives there.
Yeah, right, exactly. So he knew, you know, you can't spend the night out here. You can't be a traveler through this city and spend the night out here in the square and, you know, expect anything good to come from it, or no harm to come from it. And so he personally takes them into his own house, but you know, these guys actually searched out this guy's house, right? They weren't just wandering out here in the middle of nowhere. They actually hunted this guy down. Evidently, they noticed him in the square, but they actually hunted him down, found out where he was staying, and, you know, assaulted the house of this individual. Go ahead, brother. You got a comment?
Now, 11 of the 12 tribes, though, were incensed by this.
Yeah.
And then I think this boils down to blood thicker water. This would have been direct family members for those Benjamites, you know. That's my brother's uncle's cousin over there. I can't do that. So I don't know that so much the behavior they were okay as they're saying, I'm not going to kill my blood.
Could be.
I don't know.
Yeah. Anyway, you know, they surrounded the house. Verse 23. Let's see, verse 22, the last part. It says, New King James Version says, "Bring out the man who came to your house, that we may know him carnally." So they wanted to have a sexual experience with this guy. You know, he was a new guy in town, and I think they thought, well, it's our right to enjoy it. You know, this is our town. We can do whatever we want. That's the days of the judges, right? Everybody does what they want to do. There's no king. Everybody does what's right in their own sight. And so, you know, basically you have this homosexual gang that's attempting to launch a sexual assault on this Levite. So, question number 5 here: How does the owner of the house respond to the demands of these men? What does he think about their demands? What are some of the words that he used to describe them?
He didn't want to be so wicked.
Yeah, wicked is one of the words that he used. What else?
Why would he offer his burden?
Good, that's a good question. Yeah. Let's talk a little. Let's answer the first part, and then we'll talk a little bit about that. So wicked is one of the words. What other words do you see there?
Vile is used.
Vile, okay. Anything else?
So folly.
Folly. I think King James Version says folly. Anybody else have a different version that says something differently? Outrageous. Yeah. So it's pretty obvious this old man wasn't okay with this kind of behavior, was he? You know, he didn't in any way condone this behavior or sanction it. And so he called what they were doing wickedness, outrageous, very vile thing that they were thinking to do here. So Steve mentioned here, in order to, he points out, this guy has come to be a guest in my home. I'm responsible for taking care of him. I'm responsible for his safety. I can't let this happen to me. And so rather than allow them to take this man, he offers to them his daughter, right? So, do what?
And the concubine.
Yeah, well, the concubine comes later, right? After they reject the old man's daughter. But, what does that tell you about the day and age? It's just the way that women were viewed and treated in that day and age, wasn't it? To many people, women were just possessions. That's all they were. Yeah, but would you give away your daughter, or would you give a stranger away? If somebody comes knocking on my door, I'm gonna say, "Sorry, buddy, I like you, but see you later." Right? Yeah. But it shows you a little bit, again, just about how women were viewed and how they were treated. Sexual purity for women, was that a big deal? Not to this guy, right? And doesn't seem like really in that day and age at all, unless you read some of the previous material that we talked about there. But you look at this old man and you want to say he did something admirable, but did he? I don't know. Yeah, it'd be right. Yeah.
Clint, at that time, how seriously, as a society, did they take the right of hospitality? Because I know in some cultures, you literally were obligated to die or let your family die.
Yeah.
I mean, don't get me wrong. I read that and I'm like, you're giving their daughter. Oh, I hate you. This is no. But I know in some societies that is, if you granted the right of hospitality, literally you're supposed to die before they do.
Yeah.
Something happens. So I wonder if that at least casts that in a somewhat better light.
Well, like I said, I don't know that it justifies his behavior, but it'd be a tough situation. I don't. Everybody, we always like to say this is what we do in that situation, but until you're actually in it, I don't know if you could.
He offered her, but who went outside?
Yeah. He offered her, but did they want her?
He didn't offer himself.
No, he didn't.
Well, and it says that it's the concubine. It doesn't say anything about what they did to the daughter.
Yeah. So, he points out, he offers there in verse 24, but in verse 25 it says, but the men would not heed him. That's what the New King James Version says. In other words, they wouldn't listen to him. They didn't want anything to do with that, right? But it is interesting, you bring up, this is an older guy. And sometimes it's the older people who are the rock, or they're the people who are doing what they're supposed to do. Nobody else would practice hospitality in this city. The old man felt obligated to do it, didn't he? He knew what would happen to these people if he didn't take them in, so I think he's trying to save them from any harm, but sometimes, he had good intentions. But I don't know. I can't even fathom the idea. Can you, giving up your daughter for a stranger? Anyway, that's what he did. That's the offer. Men wouldn't take it, so they're still set on having the Levite. So what does the Levite do? Question number 6. What does he do to save himself from assault? Yeah, he grabs his concubine, right? This is the woman that cheated on him, right? This is the woman that he went back for. It took him 4 months to go back and get her. So the original language is he pushes her out the door, and closes the door behind him. Yes, sir.
But stopping to think about this, though, when did this actually happen? The Canaanites, apparently, this was pretty common among Canaanites. That's where, if you go back to Sodom and read what's his face did there, he offered his daughters,
Yeah, Lot. Yeah.
and stuff like that. So this may have been not necessarily, they weren't moving away from, Canaanite people. They were picking up their particular deals rather than wiping them out. And I think in the next, how long has it been since they've been in the land here? Has it been a long time? Apparently.
Well, no, it's not really that long, and the reason that we know that is because who's the high priest in chapter 20? Did you catch that? Yeah. Well, I think, is it Eleazar or Phineas?
Phineas, I'm sorry.
Yeah. So Phineas is actually the high priest whenever Moses is there, right? Yeah. Joshua served for, anybody have any idea how long Joshua ruled over Israel? There's not really any black and white verse. About 30 years that he ruled over Israel. Remember that Caleb was 80 years old when they finally went into the land and conquered it. So we suppose that Joshua was somewhere around that age of Caleb whenever he went into the land. He lived to be, about 110, I think? So that's about 30 years, somewhere in that area. So if he was ruling during the days of Moses, the story that we read about in Numbers is toward the end of Moses' reign. He's got to be, 60 to 80 years old, probably, Phineas, at this time. So it's not a whole lot removed from Joshua's rule. We're just kind of, and that's one of the shocking things to me. We're just kind of in the initial stages of the Judges, and this is how bad it is, And again, you think that 450-year period or thereabouts, how much worse it got, from that point on. So, anyway, some interesting thoughts and a little bit of history and timeline, I guess, behind this particular event. So he grabs his concubine, he pushes her outside. They end up abusing her all night. And what happens to her as a result? Question number 7.
Dies on the threshold, right?
Yeah, the abuse that they put her through was so violent that she ends up dead because of the process. So the Levite comes out the next day, right? And how do you view his actions? What does he do when he comes out and sees her laying there?
Yeah, let's go.
Yeah. I mean, if you really cared about somebody and they were laying there on your doorstep, wouldn't you be bending down and helping them up, and trying to see? He just walks out and says, "Get up, let's go." And so to me, again, and not only that, but it mentions the fact in verse 7, when her master arose in the morning. Would you be able to sleep if your wife was taken by a gang like that? He evidently went to bed and got up in the morning. So again, I don't see anything on his part that shows that he really cared about this woman. And then what does he end up doing with her? I mean, I understand why he did it, I guess. Well, I try to. But would you dismember somebody who you love? Could you do that? That would be a pretty gruesome thing to do to somebody you love, wouldn't it? Anyway.
Be pretty gruesome with anybody, let alone.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let's just make that one straight.
Oh my, Dennis. Okay, so to me, all of it indicates that he didn't really care about her, did he? I mean, he didn't really have any strong, he just viewed her as property. And he'd lost some property, and he'd gone back to retrieve his property because, he didn't want to lose any value. He didn't want to lose anything that might bring him something or be valuable to him. So he ends up, he dismembers her body, he circulates it throughout the 12 tribes, and Israel assembles. Adam mentioned the fact that, of course, not all these tribes, went along with what these men had done. That may be a good point there. He pointed out about Benjamin, just maybe relationship had more than anything to do with it. But they hold a council, right? What's this council? What do they decide to do? Yeah, they vowed they're not going to go home until justice has been executed, right? They call this meeting, they call all the 12 tribes. Which tribe doesn't come? Benjamin. Okay, everybody else come. All the other 11 come. They interview this Levite. They try to get all the facts. They want to figure out exactly what happened. And when they understand everything that happened, then they vow they're not going to return home until justice is executed. The Bible even says they mobilize 1/10 of their army just for supplies. In their minds, they're going to see this to the end, however long it takes. And so they want to be sure they have enough supplies that however long this particular action takes for justice to be executed, they're willing to see it through. What are some of the good things that you see in what Israel did in this particular, in chapter 20?
Well, they did inquire of the Lord.
Yeah, they don't just go out and, dive headlong into this fight, right? The first thing that they do is they seek the counsel of God, don't they? Should we go and should we fight against our brothers? And what does God say? God says go. Well, they go the first day, and what happens?
They get trained.
22,000 men die, right? So they inquire of the Lord again. Who should we go? Cast lots. Who's supposed to go first? What happens the second day? 18,000, right? Die this time. So then the third day is when things really change. The Bible says they started offering burnt offerings. They started offering peace offerings. They started making sure that their relationship with the Lord was what it was supposed to be. And they still ask. They say, do we still go? That's pretty amazing in and of itself. I don't know if I had the guts after the second day to go back the third, would you? But God says, you go, and this day is the day that I'm going to deliver them into your hands. And so, eventually, how many Benjamites died? Well, how many survived? Maybe we should say that. That's a little...
600 or 400?
Yeah, 600. Only 600 of how many? Yeah, was it 25,000 and 600 chosen men, like special ops or something? Yeah. So anyway, about 600 men are all that survived from this particular battle. So, question number 14 here. What characteristics of the old man do you admire?
Get up in his house and brought him in.
He was a hospitable person, wasn't he? He didn't have to take him in. Did he put his own life at risk? He did, didn't he? Put his own daughter at risk at least, right? But he put himself in danger by being hospitable to these people.
Was he killed too?
No, the older man wasn't, I'm sure. He wasn't even really from there. He was just visiting for work, it says. So what characteristics of the Levite man should we avoid?
Don't get too many wives.
Okay. Polygamy is never a good thing. I always tell everybody that. They say, what about polygamy in the Bible? I say, find one good thing that ever came of it. Tell me one good story, Doesn't do anybody any good in the long run. What else? Think he was vengeful?
He did mobilize the entire nation to wipe out the tribe of Benjamin.
Yeah. Why do you think he cut her up and sent it to all these tribes?
Make it stink.
It's good propaganda. Look what happened.
Yeah, again, I think if you look at the story, I don't think he was that upset by the fact that she died. I think he was upset somebody had damaged his property, and, they got away with it. I think he's more upset about that than anything else. So the last question, think about this one. Why were such drastic and gruesome measures necessary for Israel to recognize their sin? Yeah, I think, you think we get, I'm talking about in our day and age in America, do we get used to living with sin? Does it lose its shock and awe value when you're around it every day? Yeah, sometimes you need something to pop you and wake you up and, be able to see just how bad it really is. That was one of these instances. So.
I think that's why he left 40,000 of the other tribes were left.
I don't know. You'd have to ask God. So I'm not really sure about how to answer that one. All right, anybody else?